Hello, everybody. I think we're live now. I believe we're live. Okay, Houston. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Hoz. You may know me from the WriterZen Academy, where I'm an SEO host, an SEO coach, even. And this is our guest speaker today, Shannon Ash. Hi, Shannon.
Hi there. Thank you so much for
Hi.
having me.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about you and what you do, and do add in all your SEO secrets as well?
Perfect.
That's why we're here.
So I am the content marketing lead at SAS Group. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with the name, I don't blame you. We acquire and nurture profitable bootstrap companies. But as far as my background goes, I have been in content production for the past decade. I've mainly been working in agencies and specializing in B2B marketing. My path has always been, should I say, content centric. Now I've grown deeply passionate about SEO and content marketing from an organic perspective. And I would say having the mindset of both a writer, as I started my career in writing, as well as a strategist, really enables me to create these compelling stories and to make an impact. So, yeah, that's pretty much me. I think those are my strengths, and today's topic really fits in well with me. How about you?
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I did some. I used to specialize in local SEO. I started a long time ago, uh, building websites, and then a natural step was to optimize those websites, and then started selling SEO services. Then I was poached by one of the. A few years later, I was poached by one of the then one of the big three shopping carts, not Shopify, and they wanted me. They wanted me to work with their client base. So I ended up working in e-commerce for 5 years, just serving their clients, building stores, and marketing a lot of those stores. And some of those stores were huge. One of them was a drone store back when drones were just starting to become a thing. And I saw behind the scenes with a lot of these stores how much money they were bringing in and what was working and what wasn't working. So I got to get a lot of experience that way. And yeah, fast forward a few years, and here I am. I'm creating courses with WriterZen on the WriterZen Academy, and yeah, and it's all good stuff. But as you say, your perspective will be different to mine, which is great. We'll have different perspectives on today's topic, which is what is today's topic? Where am I? Here it is. Boost your rank and revenue by storytelling in SEO. Okay, so this is a very cool topic. So um, let's start by talking about why or how storytelling is essential to creating compelling content. So, essentially, a story is information with a wrapper around it, and that wrapper is context. Okay, and it's that context that gives meaning to the information. It's what makes it relatable to the user. Okay, so a story engages and captivates the reader on a deep emotional level. And to understand why, we have to go back to the beginning. So, we've been telling stories since the dawn of civilization. It's how we pass on information that can help us stay alive, be happy, avoid bad things. Billy touched the fire and he died. That's a story we all know. The format might be slightly different, but we all knew that story from, one of the first stories we were ever told, probably. Um, Fast forward a few millennia, and we developed writing. And then we used writing to tell more stories, and we're still doing that today. Okay. So storytelling is very primal to us. And what's interesting is that we're wired to act in a certain way. Imagine you walking down the road and you see that there's been an accident up ahead. There's been a car pileup, and there's a man standing in the corner just watching. So you walk up to the man and you say, "What happened?" And the man tells you the story of what happened. Think about what you're doing. You're not waiting for the man to finish talking. You're not thinking about what you're going to say next. You're actually not thinking anything. You're actually engaged, listening intently to the story because you're trying to extract information that may help you now or at some point. Okay. So what's interesting is that when you were walking down the road, you didn't have to think about breathing in and out. You didn't have to think about putting one foot in front of the other. And you didn't have to think about clearing your mind and changing your state to go into an active listening mode. It happened automatically. Okay, so that's how inbuilt storytelling is to all of us. Um, we automatically engage and become very efficient at extracting information. Now, they did some studies on this, and one that sticks to mind, comes to mind, is the Princeton University study, where they used MRI scans and they showed that all these areas in your brain light up when you're listening to a story. There's a lot going on, okay? And they discovered that the brainwaves of the listener actually synchronize with the brainwaves of the storyteller. And that's amazing and very powerful. It literally means you can hypnotize somebody by telling a story. Okay. And that's precisely why storytelling is so important, so powerful, a tool to use with content, especially with SEO, because ultimately we're trying to engage readers. And that's at the core of storytelling. Okay. Uh, by incorporating storytelling, you can create content that resonates with your audience. Stories make content relatable and also more memorable. Some stories can
Mhm.
leave a lasting impression on the audience. Um, and of course, you can influence and persuade your readers with a story and get them to take a certain action. Okay. So let's switch over to you, Shannon, and get your viewpoint on this.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you said. And I think that, it's such a simple concept, but I feel like it's something that always needs to come up because, especially when you pair it with SEO, it's certainly something that's become quite blurred. As you mentioned, storytelling is about, well, yes, of course, it's a means of communication. It builds human connection, and I believe that it helps you push a certain narrative. But, regardless of how much storytelling has changed over the years, it's really only the format, the purpose, and the outcome that's changed. The concept continues to stay the same. And if you tie that in with SEO, um, an SEO, well, let's say a story is only as good as the takeaway and the next step. And that's where it really comes full circle with SEO as well, because you're encouraging people to take the next step and, to you keeping them interested, etc. So like you're really resonating with them, as you mentioned. So yeah, that's pretty much why it's essential.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now I can see everybody's in now. So let me just mention that we're going to try and keep this to around 45 minutes max. We know you're all busy. We appreciate you being here. We will have a Q&A at the end of this and we'll try and answer all the questions. If for some reason we don't answer your question, then don't worry, there'll be a follow-up email and we'll sort something out. We'll probably answer those questions offline. Okay. So let's move on to the next point, which is let's have a look. The next point is I have these notes here, high tech. If I don't lose my track. Okay, so are SEO and storytelling mutually connected? So the two definitely intersect. Okay. At the end of the day, SEO is about content that ranks, and that requires audience engagement, and that's at the core of storytelling. So, from an SEO perspective, you've got keyword research, and that enables you to discover the language that your audience is using, and you can use that language, those keywords, to optimize your storytelling in order to align it with the search intent of your audience. Okay. From a content structure perspective, stories have a natural beginning, middle, and end. Okay, so incorporating stories into your content can help you create a better structure. It makes it more readable for users, and it can also help search engines understand your content better.
Mhm.
In terms of user experience, that's everything to do with storytelling. That's at the heart of engagement. In terms of backlink acquisition, content that has stories, well told stories, has a higher likelihood of being linked to and referenced from other websites. And in terms of social signals, the same thing applies. Good stories have a higher likelihood of being liked and shared on social media, which is going to indirectly affect your SEO effort. You're going to get social signals, you're going to get traffic from social sites. So it's all good stuff. Let's switch over to you, Shannon, and see what you think.
Yeah, so I mean, are SEO and storytelling mutually connected? I would definitely say connected, yes, but they are not the same thing, as you mentioned. To me, they are their own disciplines, but they can be connected, right? So, I mean, essentially, they should be as impactful as like together as they are standalone. And I think nowadays the overlap has just become so much um, because, because of competition, people being so fixated on results and, using all kinds of tactics to really rank higher and trigger growth at scale. I think like the element of like humanization and that kind of thing has really been lost. So yeah, I mean, if you don't know the difference between the two, it's kind of hard to change your mindset and to change the narrative you're trying to push. So, yes, I mean, I do think that they are connected, but we do need to sort of look at them as separate entities and see how together we can power that up, but they should be perfectly fine by themselves.
Absolutely. You know what's interesting as well, I'm sure you'll agree from an SEO perspective, is especially now that there are so many tools, especially AI tools that make it so easy to create content. There's a tendency now to focus on output because you can suddenly create more output than ever before. But the what tends to happen is with more increased output, the quality goes down
Mhm.
because you're spending more time on just pressing that button to generate content and not enough time on checking that that content is actually good and adding some story. And of course, one of the things that AI tools don't do very well at the moment is including a story. That's a very
Mhm.
human thing at the moment.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that? I'm just sidetrack a little bit, but it has to do with this because one of the things that I find, and obviously this is good news for any SEO, when you go into a niche and everybody is churning out articles which lack any story, any personalization, and they're just quite bland. It's just pure information with no human touch in there. And obviously, when an SEO sees that, they go, "Yes, there's room for me here to make an impact." So, what's your thoughts on that?
So, I mean, of course, AI has its place, and I mean, like if you know how to use the tools correctly, you can really achieve great results. But I do feel that it obviously takes away that creative element. And when I say creative element, I'm not meaning, like witty copy, etc., because it really can do a good job of that
Yeah,
if you've prompted it enough and changed things that you say. But from a storytelling perspective, so I mean, there's no way that it's tapping into like real life experiences, opinions, things like that. Um, and at the end of the day, AI is pulling data from existing content sources. So, I mean, if you want to have that quality, if you want to have that uniqueness, you're never going to achieve that with AI. So you're always going to have some sort of human that's vetting and changing the story, etc. So yeah, there definitely is that area that's quite gray, and I think it is lacking that.
excellent. I think when I mean, as what we're talking today, what we're talking about today, when you're armed with the information, you can use that to your advantage. When everyone is churning out bland content,
Hmm.
that lacks any, as you say, any experience. Even a simple sentence which is story based, which is like, "I've been using this for so many years." Um, that alone can change a user's mind. To say, "Well, I want to read this article now because this person has been using this for years." So yeah, that's an interesting point. So let's move on to the next point, which is the formula to achieve major content goals. Okay, so this is more of a checklist, rather than any one thing, and storytelling can fit into that checklist. It can be one item. So we'll go over a quick framework. So I would start with defining clear goals, and that sounds like the most boring thing in the world. Always, every time I see something like, set your goals, I always think, oh, not again. But it really can be simple, and it's just a question of asking yourself at the beginning, what is my content's purpose? What do I want to do with this content? Do I want to drive brand awareness? Do I want to drive traffic to a website? Do I want people to take a specific action, like signing up for a free trial or signing into a newsletter? And that's it. Once you define what the purpose of the content is, that dictates what type of content you're going to create,
Mhm.
and what type of stories will fit that content. Okay, so that it's worth spending just a few minutes thinking, or however long it takes. What is my content? What is the purpose of this? All the content that's going to be on this website or on this blog. The second thing I would say is know your audience, and that's a no-brainer. Of course, that's at the heart of every SEO campaign. If you want to write content that resonates with the audience, you need to know your audience, and that means delving into the demographics, understanding their pain points, their interests, their fears, their goals, even their age and their background, their reading level. Everything can come together. Um, the next thing would be to have a content strategy. And again, this is something that especially small blogs don't tend to do very much. I'm guilty of that over the years when I created blogs. I've thought content strategy. On day one, you're full of fire and you think, I know what I want to write about. But ranking, especially for something competitive, is a long-term game.
Mhm.
Mid to long term, if you're lucky. So that fire can very quickly go out. That first day fire. So having a content strategy can keep you on track when the going gets tough, when you're waiting for those impressions to start coming in, and that keeps you accountable as well. So having a good content strategy can define your audience, can define your topics, can define the format, as well as your distribution channels, as well as your KPIs, because you need to, when you start getting results, measure those. What am I doing right? So definitely have a content strategy, even if it's small to start with, but that's always something good, because essentially that's your roadmap. That's what you keep going back to and say, I tick all the topics that you've covered and so on. The other one is obviously create high quality content, because all the
Mhm.
marketing in the world is not going to help you if your content is beep, and people are just bouncing off your page. So you have to have good quality content, and that's probably one of the most basic things to do. And within that, you can incorporate storytelling just to make that content more engaging. So yeah, I'll let Shannon continue with the awesome checklist.
Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking about creating engaging content and we're looking at it from a ranking perspective, right? I would say that if you want to appear in SERPs, those search engine results pages, follow the ranking model of the top performer, but only use that as an inspiration, and make it unique. Make it come at it with a different angle. It needs to be relevant to your audience, and of course, the where the buyer is in their journey. So I mean, it needs to cover their answers, answer the questions that they have. Try and focus on the title, focus on visuals, focus on like engaging hooks, anything that can lead them down the funnel. Those are the key elements that you need to look at.
Fantastic. Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, so let's move on to our next point, which is pairing storytelling with SEO to get an edge over the competition. Okay, so this is the good bit. This is the meat. This is why everybody is here today. So not everything needs to be a story. Not every type of content requires a story. For example, technical guides and such things don't require a story. Um, but almost every type of content that is not story based can probably gain a lot from having a little bit of story added. Okay, so let me give you an example. Let's say I was going to write an article on WriterZen. Okay, I could have an opening paragraph that reads something along the lines of WriterZen is an intelligence gathering platform. It has a tool set that covers everything from keyword and topic research through to content creation and optimization. And that's cool. That's information. It's just pure information. And it's not too dissimilar to most or many review articles on tools. They just tell you what the tool does. Now, I could inject a little bit of personalization there and really take things to a new level. So let's let's create a new opening paragraph. That opening paragraph will be the second paragraph. The new opening paragraph will be something along the lines of, um, I've been doing SEO for over a decade. I've worked in local SEO. I've worked with e-commerce SEO. I've used all the big tools. I'm not going to mention any names. We all know who the big tools are. And then I discovered WriterZen. And
Mhm.
since then, I've used WriterZen exclusively. And in this article, I'm going to show you how I'm using WriterZen to crush my competition. Okay, so that's the new opening paragraph. And that's personalized the content. It's giving it context. It lets the user see how it relates to them, depending on where they are on their journey, or on the funnel. And they can think, okay, I'm an SEO. I want to know how to use this tool. This guy's going to show me. Um, and but it does a lot more than that. It conveys a lot of things. If you think about it, it conveys experience. I have experience in SEO. I've been doing it for over a decade, and at various levels. And I have experience using the tool, using WriterZen. So there's the experience. I have expertise. I have expertise in SEO because I've been doing it for so long, and I've been doing it, so on and off with different types. And I have expertise using the WriterZen tool. And clearly, that expertise is good enough because I'm crushing my competition, which means I'm using the tool well. Okay. It also has authority. These elements overlap. These elements overlap. So I also have authority for the same reasons. Authority enough to speak about SEO because I've been doing it for a long time. Because I get good results. I have enough authority to speak about the WriterZen toolset because I use it every day and I'm using it well. And I also convey trust. You can trust
Mhm.
me to talk about SEO because I've been doing it for a long time. You can trust my review on WriterZen because I'm a long time user. And also, I'm using it well because I'm crushing my competition. And you can trust my review because I've used the other big tools. So I have comparative data. So it conveys all that is conveyed with just one paragraph that it's story based. Okay. And that can change the user's perspective and encourage them to actually read through the entire article. Okay. And I can boost the engagement by sprinkling more stories along the article to keep that engagement going. I can add in some anecdotes and some personal bits of story. And on from a search engine perspective, especially from Google's perspective, that first paragraph hits all the Google public criteria for ranking. The
Mhm.
EEAT, experience, expertise, authority, and trust. And all that is happening with just one paragraph. So it's not too difficult, but you can gain a lot by just personalizing your content a little bit. And this is what we touched about, we alluded to just when we were talking about AI, not being able to personalize it too well, because we can inject that experience, that personal experience, saying, I use this, and we can explain a personal situation where you use this tool and how you use it and the results that you got, and that makes your content unique. But it also increases that user trust, that reader's trust, because you're adding your experience, your personal experience. Okay, so uh, Shannon.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. For me, I think that telling a story, as you mentioned, some pain points, sharing an experience, etc. Those type of things shouldn't be affected by SEO elements or best practices in the sense of like the search intent, the keywords, the categorization, etc. I strongly believe that as long as you are connecting with a persona and you matching their pain points, you can always follow all kinds of best practices and stuff to help Google understand your content better and help it rank faster, etc. So I mean, it should never be one or the other. You should never be so fixated on just like knowing whatever I'm putting down, the end result is X. It should be something that you're able to work upon. So focus on your story, incorporate the elements at the end, and then of course back to getting an edge over your competition, which actually links up with the previous point of a good content formula to achieving different results is then obviously focusing on things like distribution and promoting your content and measuring results, making sure that you're using the right metrics, not just focusing on vanity metrics, um, making sure that whatever your initial idea was for a piece of content, if it doesn't end up matching those expectations, start optimizing it. Look at ways that you can improve it. Always just use what has worked in the past for your brand as an idea, because it gives you some good insights as to who your customers are you relating to the ideal audience, etc. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's also showing you what kind of content is your money makers, things like that. So yeah, I would say having that story and incorporating the rest of SEO as a secondary, and then really just maximizing it by using the right channels to distribute that content.
Excellent. Good stuff. There's some good stuff coming out here. I wish I was in the audience. Okay, fantastic. So we've covered all 4 points, I think, pretty well. So I think we can flip over to the Q&A now. I can see some coming in already. Let's have a look. How can storytelling be integrated into social media strategies for SEO? Great. I get the difficult one. Thank you. Okay, so I would say don't overthink this. Okay. We all tell stories every day. That's the thing. I'm not saying we all lie every day. I'm saying we all tell stories of some form every day. So a story can be as simple as a sentence. So let's say you're creating a short piece of social content. It could be a tweet, it could be a short Facebook post about WriterZen. And maybe it's a link to a tutorial or a call to action of some sort. You want people to know about the software, and you want them to take up the free trial. Now, you could incorporate a little bit of story there, and keep in mind this is for a short social post. So you could say something like, I just hit the top spot in Google for an impossible keyword using WriterZen after everything else has failed me for the past 2 years. That short story tells of a struggle that every SEO can relate to, not ranking, and then of a triumph that every SEO wants. You're now ranking, and it tells of a timeline as well. The 2 years you could include in there. After trying other tools, and I've just got these results now finally. So that makes the content a lot more compelling when you then say they're offering a free trial. Check out the tool here, or check out my tutorial. You've just really sold them on the reason as to why to click the link. If you strip out the story, then all you're posting on social media, and I think we all see this a lot, is, hey guys, check this out, and a link. And there's just no reason for anybody to click that link. Why would they? So yeah, so you can gain a lot, and that's how I would do it. Just adding a little bit of personalization, a little bit of story, something that you have to say about whatever it is that you're posting about on social media, and you'll go a long way. Next question. Can you see the questions there, Shannon?
I can.
They're
All
coming in
right.
fast.
Are there any potential drawbacks or challenges when implementing storytelling in SEO? So, in terms of challenges and drawbacks, I would say, the nature of the story, of course. If it's hyper relevant to a specific time or event that's happening, it traditionally will have a shorter lifespan. So, it won't be, evergreen content from an SEO perspective. It could also be a challenge if you're not speaking to the right audience in the right phase of their search. So essentially, you could miss the mark there. It could also be a fail if you're not speaking from a place of expertise, authority, trust, etc. And maybe if you're not leaning on, supportive visuals, data, etc. So what I mean by that is you're showing and telling, but you're not really showing and telling. So you're not incorporating things naturally, and really really creating that thick content that SEO wants, and you're kind of keeping it very thin, and you're not adding all the elements that would be, rank worthy, etc. So I would say those are the biggest challenges.
Okay, you're hired. Okay. Right. So I can see the next question here. Let's have a look. What are the key benefits of incorporating storytelling in SEO strategies? Okay. The key benefits are engagement and trust. Engagement means an increase in dwell time, which is more on-page time, which is something search engines like Google measure in order to determine how engaging your content is. And trust happens when your readers can relate and empathize with your content. And the thing that makes that happen is the story around the information. Okay, so that's those are the key benefits of using stories in your SEO strategy. Can you see the next one?
Yes. Can you provide examples of successful storytelling in SEO? So something that I've actually seen recently that really stood out, and I wouldn't say it's the best that I've ever seen, but it is a campaign that IKEA, the furniture store, was running. And essentially, what the campaign was something to do with their assembly service. So the puzzle, it created like a puzzle vision in a video, and everything was back to front. So it kind of digged at the fact that you think you can do it, but look, it ends up being a complete mess, etc. So the way that they tell stories in their videos as well as their visuals, I think, is always so relatable. They're very comfortable with their audience, and they're not trying to be anything that they're not. They everything that they put out there is very much aligned with some type of pain point that someone's experiencing in their life. So from a storytelling perspective, I think that's great. In terms of SEO, look, I think they've nailed product SEO from an e-commerce perspective. They really. I'm here in Spain, and I don't even think that the SEO is as high as or as advanced as it is, in the from the UK to the US, etc. But the minute I type in a sofa, I'm always getting links to IKEA. They know where I am in my journey. When I go onto their website, their navigation and their taxonomy structure of their website is always on point. So I think, they've just covered so many elements of content marketing in different formats. And yeah, they never fail to let me down. So I think that's something, especially the puzzle assembly service. I saw it recently on LinkedIn, and it popped out, and it was just like, oh, that's so brilliant. Like, it's something so simple. And even the words that they used were back to front in this puzzle. So it was really just a good explanation of, digging at us that think we can do this all ourselves.
IKEA are great, aren't they? I love walking around the stores, and the way that the bedrooms are all set up, and you can just sit on the chairs and everything. It's a really clever company. This is a by the side, but um, they have an IKEA university in
Oh,
I think it's
wow.
in Sweden, yeah, and you go there for
Sweden, yeah,
three
yeah.
years and you learn to like put things together, and obviously
Oh my.
some crazy voodoo that they do, but yeah, that's actually crazy. But it's a fascinating story, the IKEA story. I read it once. I'm not going to go into it here, but it's well worth a read. It's really, especially if you're starting a brand of any kind. When it comes to having a strong story behind your brand, it's IKEA is a must read. It's really really good, strong personal story behind it all. It's just fabulous. But yeah, they're great. Their adverts are great as well. I like them.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can see another one here. Can storytelling be effective for all types of businesses and industries? Well, every business and industry is made up of people, and people engage with stories. Okay, so unless you're writing technical guides or the type of content where story has no place, you will almost always see a boost in engagement by including storytelling. So the answer has to be yes. If I was now doing some work for a company, let's say in the gas sector, why not? I got a gas bill this morning, so I'm just bringing that up. It's in my mind. So, the first thing I would do as an SEO is sit down and look at the competition. And if nobody was incorporating story in there, I would think about how I can incorporate story in there. That's immediately going to make your content stand out from the others. If you can tie it to the brand and have a consistent way of telling stories, like IKEA do, then that's going to make your brand much more memorable, and that can be really powerful, especially if you're in a niche where not everybody is really telling stories, or they're not using this technique well. That can really make a big difference to your content. Okay, so do we see any more questions in the queue? I think I see another one there.
All
This
right.
one's
Yep. So this, I mean, ties into previous chats we had about AI. Can AI generated content be used effectively for storytelling in SEO? So not for storytelling, as I mentioned, I don't think you'd be able to guarantee the quality of content always, the uniqueness, and the fact that obviously AI tools are pulling data from existing sources. So there's nothing new that you can share. But for scale, yes. I mean, if you're trying to scale your content and get things out as fast as possible, then 100%. But there are some disadvantages, and you're always going to have some human input that's vetting the content, changing the plot, etc., to make that story unique and to bring that element back to life. Otherwise, you're kind of just spitting out what's existing, and you're just adding to the sameness that's already on Google. So yeah,
that would make a great slogan. Don't add to the
to the
sameness.
sameness.
I like that. I like that. Okay, so fantastic. So is that I see another one. Are there any specific storytelling formats or mediums that work well for SEO? Um, Again, as Shannon mentioned before, storytelling and SEO are two separate things. They do intersect, of course, as we've shown, and you can combine them to make really powerful content. But keep in mind that because they are separate entities, let's call them, um, there isn't one particular format that works better than another. That's going to depend more on your audience. As I mentioned before, your keyword research will help you discover the type of language that your audience is using, and you can then use those keywords to optimize your storytelling so that it aligns with the search intent. So depending whether you are on the buyer journey, depending on whether the search is informational or commercial, the type of story that you deploy should really mirror and match that. Okay, so if somebody's trying to buy a table from IKEA, you wouldn't.
I promise we're not IKEA ambassadors.
I know this is not sponsored by IKEA now, um, but yeah, if somebody's trying to buy a table, and you need to show them the right content with the right story in order to lead them down that path to help them make that final decision. You wouldn't necessarily, if it's a specific table that they want a mahogany table and they've clicked on that, you wouldn't use a comparative story to necessarily and use an informative article to explain, this is the difference between this table and all the others, because they probably already know the difference. They're just looking for the best mahogany table. So now's the time to go a bit more, get a bit stronger with your copy and talk about the mahogany table that they're actually searching for, and talk about the benefits and why this table is the right table, and why they are correct in their assumption that this is the right table for them. So again, your storytelling format is going to depend on the type of content that you're deploying that story on.
Mhm.
My apologies for that. And um, that completely threw me. That was actually to say, we're on track here. We're on track. So it depends on the type of content that you're going to put out there. But when it comes to the actual format, it will be intuitive to almost all of us, because it's so inbuilt. Storytelling is so inbuilt. It's something that we do every single day. You know, if you're in a situation where you're in the kitchen and you're stealing a cookie from the jar, and somebody comes in and you know what story to tell. You're not going to tell a story that makes no sense. You're going to say, "Oh well, I was hungry, and then this happened, and I thought it would be okay, and I was going to replace it." You're doing this automatically and instinctively. So with your content, you'll know, as with the example before of the writers an article, when it comes to creating an opening paragraph, it's instinctive. You know what story is going to make sense with that content. So the format will depend on the content.
Just out of interest, what type of formats do you enjoy consuming stories in?
Well, something I didn't mention before is my aspiration was to be a horror writer. I used to write horror stories.
What?
I got one published a long time ago, and I don't recommend publishers. It's, oh my god, I went self-published after that.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so I used to write short stuff, but I've also written satire and comedies and kids stories for my kids. So I just like a good story. Every night I'm not very good at sleeping, so I listen to horror stories. I just go to YouTube and find horror stories, and I enjoy those. But so as such, as long the story should be seamless. When you're reading an article and it has a story woven in there, you shouldn't notice that there's a story there. It should be seamless. If it doesn't make sense, then it's not going to gel well. It's going to stick out, and that's when you think, oh, there's a problem here. This is not very well written, and you might not identify exactly why it's not properly written or the way it should be written, but you identify that there's a problem. It's like when you're playing music and you hit a bum note, and you don't have to know music to know that something didn't sound right. There was a bit of discordant. When it comes to content, I like content that I like stories in content that I read and I don't realize it's a story.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily. You read the content and you enjoy it. Uh, and you're engaged. If it's a good story, especially if it's a relevant story, then you're engaged, because you want to know how this applies to you, how you could use this to make money, to not starve. So we're extracting information from the story format. Um, so any story that is well written into the content should be woven. It should be like a tightly knit thing that you don't realize it's a story. So that's the kind of story I enjoy.
Good to
What
know.
about you? What about you, Shannon?
No, I mean, I feel the same as a writer. I mean, I read constantly, so I think if I'm thinking of like an author of a book, right? So you start to learn to love the type of writing and the style of writing that someone puts forward. So that kind of keeps you wanting more. And I think in a digital marketing or an SEO environment, that's essentially what leaves me. If I'm reading through a piece of content and I'm left wanting more, I consider that to be a good story. So whether I'm clicking through to other content, whether I know enough now to potentially book a product demo or something like that, I consider the story that's been told to me to be successful because I'm taking action. So, but yeah, I mean, in terms of different mediums, I love reading, of course, but I think our attention spans can be a little at times. So, I mean, a good video or a good podcast,
Mm.
if you're able to cover all areas with the same story in different ways and snippets, I think that's really good.
Yeah, you touched on a great point there, and you said something along the lines of, if the story leaves you wanting more, if you enjoyed it, and you know it's a good story, and I just want to mention something that's really when I was talking about the gas example. Yes, the webinar is going okay. It's just, I'm sorry about this. My alarm is telling me, even though I've got it on silence, it just comes through. So you touched on a great point there, and that is that if you're creating content, and you're consistent with your storytelling and your storytelling format, and your readers enjoy that, you have a tremendous advantage, because typically when we shop for something, or when we're looking for information, we don't just go to one page, read it, and go, okay, I'm going to buy that. Especially if it's a high dollar um, item, we get a few pages. If you're going to, even if it's a tool and you're looking for the review, you're going to read more than one, just to
Hmm.
get different perspectives. And if you hit on one that has a great story, and as you say, leaves you wanting more, when you go to the next, if the next is just a boilerplate content, then it just highlights how good the previous one was. And that can earn you a subscriber, that can turn into repeat customers, repeat audience, repeat visitors. So if you build your brand around a certain voice and a certain story format that people really enjoy, they can, that can really grow your brand. You know, once you've done all the hard work to rank that page to get a visitor there, if you're getting no repeat visitors, then you rely on new visitors every single month. um, the hard work is done at that point. If you have a good story there and good content that leaves you wanting more, then that visitor is sure to subscribe or to take whatever call to action you have, and then keep coming back to you. So super important. Whichever way you look at it, stories just win in most cases. I see another question here. How do I match my storytelling narrative to my audience? Um, that's more about demographics, knowing and understanding your audience. And as for the story, again, that will be intuitive. And if it isn't, you can always ask somebody. Let me give you an example. If you're writing some content targeted at 18-year-olds, then, let's say 18 to 25-year-olds, um, you're not going to be very successful selling life insurance, because at that stage of life, you're not thinking about life insurance. You think that life is going to go on forever, and you think, I'll deal with that, or pensions. So if you craft a story around how, you're very glad that you started saving early on, and now you've got this great big fat pension. um, it might appeal to some of them, of the more conservative ones in the audience. They might think, yeah, but generally the engagement I would expect, again, and this depends on generations, because it's interesting that different generations have different attitudes, um, and but generally, I think most people in that age bracket are not going to be interested in the very far off future for them, how they perceive it. And again, if your audience is in the 60 plus bracket, um, things are changing. And of course, I'm not stereotyping, but a lot of them are not interested in starting a new business. Some of them are. Why not? I think it was in it. Colonel Sanders from KFC, who was 80 something when he created KFC. So again, that would be a good story to inject for that audience, because it's inspirational. You read that and
Exactly.
you think, okay, he did that, I could do that. You see some videos sometimes on YouTube of 90-year-olds who have like six packs, and they're like lifting all these weights, and that's inspirational for a certain age bracket. Um, 20-year-olds might look at that and go, that's a really cool thing. I wish he was my granddad. But it doesn't necessarily inspire them, because it's not they're not the target audience. So your storytelling will become intuitive, and you match it to your audience by what your audience likes and what your audience needs. And that comes down to demographics, knowing the needs, the pain points. And that's why, for example, insurances that or products, I think in products that sell that target pain, and they target a certain demographic, and they know how to speak to them, and because they know the demographic, then that content resonates with them. So again, you're matching your storytelling really depends on your audience's need. What do they want? What are they looking for? And then match the right story to them. Any
Yes,
thoughts on that,
100%.
Shannon?
Just to add my 2 cents. So I mean, like, as you say, understanding your audience. And I know many people don't like to use personas because they feel that it just boxes people in. But I find that it's so important, especially now when you're looking at, different stages of the funnel, etc. So, I mean, like if you have created a persona that is, a male, X age, this is what their position is at a specific company. Perhaps they're very high up, and they're the decision makers. So essentially, you would be creating content that would, they're the ones that are making a decision. So it would be bottom of the funnel, middle to bottom funnel type of content. You're speaking to someone that is just like in the informational stage, and it's their first job, and they just want to learn a little bit more about the industry, things like that. So I think that's where personas and really understanding your audience comes into play. And yeah, I mean, it's a term that you can use loosely, but it's something that you need to structure that element, and to really understand how you can market to certain audiences, the type of tonality, tone of voice, and things that you use as well. As you mentioned, with the younger groups, you will start using terms and jargon that's more lit and woke and all sorts of things. When you're speaking to older people, it's different. You take on a different narrative as well. So yeah.
Absolutely. And your content is dictated by your audience, by what they need, by those demographics. And then in turn, your storytelling is dictated by the type of content that you're creating. Your certain stories are going to fit certain types of content. So it all comes back to your audience, and what it is that they need. You need to figure out that first before you know
Hmm.
what type of content to create, before you know what type of story is going to fit that content. And as I said, with the cookie jar, the story will make sense. Once you have the content and you know who you're talking to and how you're talking to them and what you're talking to them about, the story will just naturally appear. Okay, well, I have some experience in this particular thing, because I use this and that, and this happens. So I'm going to inject some of that in there to make it, for example, to make it clear, to convey that this can be done by anybody. A lot of people who sell courses, who say, how I made $1 million in like, 2 hours. They will say, you see a
Sign
lot
me
of that.
up.
In YouTube, you see a lot of that. But they always say something like, if I can do it, then anyone can do it. And what they're doing there, that's a little story that's actually saying, look, I'm just an average person, and I managed to do this. I'm going to show you how, and then you can do it. And that lowers the barrier of entry. If you just come in with a suit and a tie and you say, I make 60 million a year, the first thing from you have no context. You don't know what this guy's education is, what his
Hmm.
opportunities are, where he is, because demographic, that matters as well. A geographic, sorry. If Einstein was born in the North Pole, it would have been a different story. So you have to be in the right place as well, and to have the right opportunities, to know the right people. If you just come on and say, I make this much money, and there's no story there. But if you say, if I can do this, work in a petrol station, or in a gas station, as they say in the US, and just doing this part time 2 hours a day, you're giving a lot of context there with a little story. So yeah. Okay, so I think we've actually rifled through all the Q&A there, all the questions, and we've covered this subject really well, I think. So I hope everybody has enjoyed that. And we're not going to take too much of your time. I can see that we're approaching the hour mark, so we've made good time here. So once again, thank you very much, Shannon, for joining us, and for giving us your fabulous input. Now all I can think of is IKEA. Um, they have a cantina, and they make these hot dogs. They're fantastic. I'm just saying.
Oh, and the meatballs.
Yeah, the
Yeah, so
meatballs. Oh my God, everybody's now going to be thinking of IKEA. At the end of this webinar, they'll say, "What did you learn? IKEA have
yeah.
meatballs." But that's a
Yeah, no.
story. That's a story in itself, and it's a memorable story. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
It
So
was it was lovely. Thank you so much for having me. And I think we only just scratched the surface, if we're being
we
honest.
did.
I
We
think
did.
it's something we can go on speak for days about. But yeah,
Absolutely.
this was a good
Yeah.
start, and it was great questions.
Join us for part two, everybody.
All
Okay. Thank you very much,
right.
and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.